Hello and welcome to another Back to Jerusalem podcast. I'm Eugene, your host for this time, and I'm coming to you live on delay from somewhere within the borders of China this time. I've been traveling around China for a while now, going from city to city, church to church, meeting with Christians, pastors, missionaries in training, evangelists, and it has been an eye-opening experience. I'm seeing church growth unlike anything that I've seen before. What is different about the church in China today is that we are seeing more church explosions in the urban areas. And I'll do a podcast on that later. Right now, I have to share with you an urgent message that comes directly from an underground house church pastor that wants to put out a warning about the things that are taking place. Outside of the city of Shanghai, I meet with a Chinese pastor by the name of Pastor Amos. It's not his real name. But he came into my hotel room, putting his life on the line in order to share with me details about the Chinese government's 5-year plan to change Christianity from the inside. Now, before you kind of dismiss this podcast and think that maybe Pastor Amos is just a small-time pastor, doesn't really know what he's talking about, let me just inform you that Pastor Amos is the pastor of an urban church that has about 150,000 members in one city alone. He has one of the largest urban networks in all of China. And unlike most pastors in the underground house church, he has a unique position of also being a pastor with the Three Self Church. That's why I can't use his real name for security and to protect him. But Pastor Amos is risking his life to share what I'm going to share with you right now in this podcast. For China, he lays out something that I'm going to share with you in a 4-part series. This is part 2 of a 4-part series. If you didn't listen to part 1, you can already go back in our archives and find part 1 and listen to what I'm building on in this podcast. So if there are certain things in this podcast that you don't understand, go back and listen to the one previous. This one makes a lot more sense when you've listened to part 1. But Pastor Amos lays out the details of the government's 5-year plan to change Christianity into a more China-friendly religion. And I talked about what China has already done, what they've already started. But the next thing that they are doing is that in their plan, they are attempting to change the Bible. This is what Pastor Amos said, quote, "Fake Bibles are coming. China is working on a new Bible translation that is expected to be the only official Bible allowed in the country." What Pastor Amos is warning comes immediately after a special meeting between the official Church of China and the Scottish Bible Society. You see, right now the communist government is playing full court press. They're trying to win over Christian leaders in the West. They are taking preemptive measures to quell any concerns before they have the chance to really take root in the minds of Western Christians. Government delegations are carefully moderating meetings to put forth a plan together with Westerners, hand in hand, for a plan to change the Bible. Guys, you're going to start seeing this in the West as well. Mark my words. China's leading the way on this. China has announced that this new Bible will be, quote, more social friendly. That means more socialist friendly. Even though they say it's an effort to make it more Chinese, it's actually it's an effort to make it more communist. According to the official government website, quote, "Over the years, the demand for the Bible in Chinese churches has shifted from quantity to quality." That's not completely true. This first premise is simply false on its face. Chinese Christians are happy with the Chinese Union Bible. That's the current translation that is used by every Chinese. In fact, Chinese only read from this Chinese Union Bible that was translated and made available in the early 1900s. but those Bibles are in drastic shortage. Pastor Amos said this, quote, "We need more Bibles," end quote. His plea for more Bibles is echoed through all the leaders that are crying out that I met with just this month alone. The battle cry for more Bibles continues to increase more and more. In fact, if you want to be a part of sending Bibles to China, you can go to the Back to Jerusalem website right now and make a donation for Bibles in China. Right now, a Bible in China costs us about $3. That roughly is $2 or more, depending on the exchange rate. And our exchange rate is very poor. The reason why is we have to use a lot of different illegal methodologies in order to get money into the country of China. So every dollar that we get in probably costs us about $1.20 or $1.30. And then the rest of the money of that $3 is used for delivery of Bibles. But China has created an artificial shortage of Bibles, and that's why there's such a big need. How did they create this official shortage? Easy. They did it by limiting the number of Bibles printed in the Chinese language. So they don't allow those official Bibles to be printed. They don't allow those official Bibles to be purchased. They don't allow those official Bibles to be distributed. You can only buy them in small numbers, and they can only be purchased by individuals who are registered with the official church. And those that buy can't buy in the big bulk numbers that we need in order to do the distribution. The majority of believers in China today are not registered with the official church. They're with the underground house church. The reason they're called the underground house church is because they're not legal. They're illegal. So it's just as appropriate to say the illegal Christians in China. So they can't legally purchase a Bible in China. So they have to rely on someone purchasing it for them. But the printed Bible, now you may look at the numbers, you may go to the Nanjing Press and be like, Eugene, what are you talking about? I saw that China prints more Bibles than any country in the world. You're blowing hot air. That's a ruse. China's doing that for profit. They don't care how to make profit. Guys, they're making profit right now by making fentanyl and sending it to the West to kill people. If they can make a profit on it, they're going to do it. They're making a profit on printing Bibles for Spain, England, America, Canada, South Africa, Singapore, Korea, Germany. No matter what the language is, you're probably purchasing a Bible that was printed in China. Those are for export. That's the numbers that they brag about. Those are purposefully misleading. They get donations from around the world to buy paper. And then they charge companies to print Bibles for profit. So basically, people are giving donations to help China make more money. Those Bibles are not being printed in large number in the Chinese language for domestic distribution. So they are creating an artificial shortage by, one, restricting the number of Bibles that are printed in the country, restricting the number of Bibles that are available in the Chinese language, and restricting the number of Bibles that are allowed to be purchased and distributed inside of China. They are also creating an artificial shortage by destroying the current Bibles. So even with the current Bible shortage that there is, they're destroying the current Bibles. They're raiding churches, collecting Bibles, and destroying them. This helps create an artificial shortage, which creates a demand for the Bible, which means that when they come out with their new Bible translation, they're hoping there will be a demand for it. Then they can make their argument and say, see, we told you. They are hungry for quality, not quantity. It's a lie. The official article goes on to say this, quote, in view of the heresies facing the church in China, Reverend Xu also stressed the importance of higher quality personnel and correct Bible teaching, end quote. That means you can't teach the Bible the way that Jesus shares it. You have to teach it in the way that the Communist Party approves. Every pastor, before they preach, has to hand their sermon in several weeks before they preach it. It has to be approved by the Communist Party, who are atheists and don't know the first freaking thing about Christianity or the Bible. Yet they edit it and say what can be said and what cannot. It's important to understand that Christians who are not registered with the official government church are considered to be heretical. So when they talk about heretics, they're not talking about some cult like protesters that are out there, claiming for Jesus returning back in the form of a woman. They are saying that Christians that are not registered with the government, who's run by the Communist Party, are heretical. And so they want to make their Bibles for them. At the meeting, the same Reverend Shu, who's the official government representative, said this, quote, he refutes the numbers that the church in China modified the Bible. He refutes the rumors that the church in China modified the Bible, which he called, quote, complete nonsense, end quote. However, he completely contradicted himself. When he says that, he is confirming the ongoing Bible translation that the Communist Party is right now working on, and then says that it's refuted rumors that the church is working on modifying the Bible. Of course you are. If you are working on a translation because you don't like the translation that all the other Chinese like, which is the Chinese Union Bible, then you are admitting. But we already know that. We already know that the Chinese government has already started to translate the Bible. Early evidence of what the new translation looks like has already been shared by us on our website. You can look that up in our archives. One of those examples, for instance, was taught at a law school for ethics using a Bible translation that had to originate in China because I've never seen it before. And so at the ethics training for law school students in China, they were taught the story of Jesus helping the woman that was accused of adultery. And in the Chinese version, the woman that was being accused of adultery, Jesus writes something in the sand that shocks everybody that's around, and those that were going to stone her instead get up and leave. And when they all leave, Jesus looks at her and says, "Where are your accusers?" And she says, "None." Then Jesus gets up, grabs the stones that the other men left behind, and used them to stone the woman to death, because he said nobody is above the law. That is a drastic change from the actual biblical story and comes from China's translation that may or may not make it into the new Bible translation that they hope to have done in 5 years, with a delay calculated from the COVID virus. B2J has been working together with Pastor Amos for about 30 years. So he understands a few things, and we understand his concerns because we've been working together with him. In fact, in the 1990s, Pastor Amos was key in one of the earliest Bible deliveries together with Brother Ren and Brother Eugene. They did a Bible delivery in the 1990s because there were tens of millions of believers that desperately wanted to get the Bible. Now, this is a true story. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read directly from this event as it took place. You can read this event for yourself if you want to, either on our website or in our book called Underground Church. So Underground Church is probably one of the only books out there, one of the few books out there, I should say, that breaks down different networks inside of China, takes the mystery out of what it means to be with the underground house church in China, explains it in very simple language, who they are, how they started, how they operate, and what their vision is for the future. Brother Ren, if you're not familiar with him, he's going to be speaking in Canada next week from the time that I'm doing this podcast. He's been the pastor of Brother Yun for about 30 years, who's known also as the Heavenly Man. So he's one of the people that is very intricately involved in Bible delivery. So in the 1990s, Pastor Amos helped. And this is what Brother Ren shares about that event. He says this: This comes again from our from our book, Underground Church. After carrying Bibles into China for several months, I began to feel challenged by the expense involved. This is Brother Ren speaking. Being a donkey for Jesus was not cheap. I sat down and figured out all the actual costs of taking Bibles into China. And if you calculated the cost of printing the Bibles in Japan, which is where many of the Bibles were printed in the 90s, shipping them to Hong Kong, paying for travel expenses for the carrier, such as airfare, food, and lodging, and losing some of the Bibles to confiscation when they crossed the border, it was a very expensive operation. In fact, I figured it out to be more than $50 per Bible, and that was in the 1990s. God gave me the idea of printing a Bible inside of China, but I was a courier, not a printer. Who was I to begin a printing operation? But I went to people from several mission organizations that I knew and had a history of doing these kind of projects, and I asked them what they thought about the idea of partnering with me to print Bibles in China. And every time I mentioned the idea, I got one of two responses. They either said that they had tried before and it didn't work, or they hadn't tried before and didn't want to. The Bible League said that they had just made a large financial investment in an expensive printing press in Japan. So printing in China would make the investment obsolete. Many organizations had burned their hands in China and they didn't want to try again. I was disappointed at the results of trying to find a partner who knew what they were doing. I had no clue what to do next. But the Lord would not take the burden from my mind. On one occasion in 1994, I was able to have a meeting with a well-known business owner from Taiwan who owned one of the major skyscrapers in prestigious Causeway Bay, Hong Kong. We met and discussed the idea of printing inside of China. The business owner was a Christian and he wanted to use his resources to help the church in China. He would later be one of the people who helped get Brother Eugene out of China. The Taiwanese Christian businessman liked the idea of printing Bibles in China and agreed with me that there must be a better way than carrying the Bibles across the border in suitcases. So he arranged for his secretary to meet with me at the Hong Kong airport, and she gave me the money to begin the process of searching for a way to print the Bible inside China. From Hong Kong, I traveled to Guilin, and I contacted a professor at one of the local universities who was a good friend of Brother Eugene. This is the same professor who spent time living with Brother Eugene and who painstakingly hand-wrote Eugene's entire testimony on a pad of paper. And that pad of paper eventually led to the book known around the world today as The Heavenly Man. I have someone I would like to have meet with you, the professor said to me when I met with him in Guilin. In China, you don't just look up a potential partner in the yellow pages. You are either introduced to them or you don't get any partners at all. With most things in China, it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. The professor thought it would be beneficial for me to meet with his friend, so he knew that I was up and knew the risks involved in printing the Bible in China, so he connected with someone that he knew and he thought would be experienced enough to help me tackle the dangerous task. I needed someone who could help me navigate the underground world of illegal activity in China. When I met with the professor's friend for the first time, he looked like he was straight out of a movie. The man looked like a CIA agent. Just by looking at him, you could tell that he was used to living life on the other side of authority. There was something about the way that he looked very shady. He was wearing a hunting vest. His hair was pulled back into a thick black ponytail, and he just looked like someone who seemed to be fully aware of everything going on around him. When he walked into the room, I thought I had been compromised. I thought that the professor had told me the wrong person, and now China's Public Security Bureau had assigned this man to take me down. This is my friend Simon. It's not his real name for the purpose of this writing. The professor said, as I reached out to shake his hand, even though I had suspicions, I quickly found myself falling victim to Simon's quick wit and charm. However, I remained very cautious the first time that I met with him and chose not to share with him the idea for printing Bibles. I soon went back to Hong Kong, but often traveled to Guilin. Many foreigners liked to take the Bible to Guangzhou, and their favorite place to stay was the Garden Hotel. Because of this fact, it was a heavily watched hotel and most of the rooms were wired. The hotel was a gold mine for the Chinese authorities because many foreign guests would talk about their ideas and projects openly, carelessly mentioning names of coworkers. All of this information was thus made available to the Chinese authorities to collect and exploit. On one of my trips to Guilin, the phone in my hotel room rang soon after I had arrived. I answered the phone and it was Simon, and I wondered, how did he even know that I was in town? I hadn't told anyone that I was going to Guilin. No one should have known which hotel I was staying at, let alone the very room that I was in. Immediately, I was suspicious. Ni hao, I said as a general greeting. Simon invited me to come to his home for dinner, a huge honor in China. I was still suspicious. He seemed to know a little too much. I thought the dinner might be a ruse to trap me. But there was another part of me that said, trust him. My policy was to follow the old Ronald Reagan strategy of trust but verify. So I accepted the invitation. I took a taxi to the location where he told me to go, but I didn't go directly to the address. Instead, I asked the driver to keep driving. We drove a few blocks down the road, and then I walked around the area, looking for anything suspicious, for a possible escape route if I needed to leave in a hurry. Simon would later tell me that he had contacts in my hotel that I was staying in, and who he had instructed to look out for me and alert him if they saw me. I didn't know it then, but Simon would soon play a huge part in my life, and we would grow to be very close friends. When I went into the home, the house was filled with some of the most amazing aromas I've ever smelled in my entire life. Simon was amazing. He was a world-class chef. He warmly welcomed me into his home and showed me around. It's not easy to explain, but we had an immediate connection. Simon was a new friend, but I felt as if I had known him for years. I later went and spent time with his parents and grandparents. I'm usually very secretive about my vision and projects for China, but with Simon's family, I shared exactly what God had called me to do. I shared with him about my ideas regarding the movement of God in the world and what I felt God had told me regarding the future of China and the Chinese underground house church. Upon hearing my story, Simon's grandma took me by the hand, looked intensely in my eyes, and asked me one of the strangest questions I've ever been asked. Would you like to be adopted by our family? I heard the words that she said, but immediately thought that I must not be able to understand her Chinese. She asked again, would you like to be adopted by our family? As she said it again, I realized that I did in fact understand the words coming out of her mouth. They just didn't make sense. Why would I want to be adopted? I was 40 years old. The time to adopt me was well over. Besides, I had my own mother and father and grandparents. I began to tell myself that maybe the family needed money or a golden goose to help their family with financial problems and saw this foreigner as someone that might help them with a way out of their poverty. I took that opportunity to reiterate that I was only a missionary who was financially poor and had nothing to offer. The grandmother looked at me. You could tell from the expression on her face that my financial status had never crossed her mind. The grandmother was persistent. She felt that God was telling her to bring me into her family. I also felt the presence of the Lord and humbly accepted this great honor. Together, we went through the entire official process. I filled out all the paperwork, and upon completion, we had an official ceremony making the time when I would become an adopted member of Simon's family. From that day on, Simon and I became inseparable ministry partners. Whenever people saw us, they used to ask who we were, and I would jokingly reply that we were brothers. This was funny to everyone who witnessed it because it was obvious that this Chinese man and Western European were not brothers. We would always tell people that we had different mothers but the same father. Simon became my partner in crime to print Bibles in China. He turned out to be an amazing, resourceful man. Once we decided to print the Bible in China, we quickly arrived at the same conclusion. It could be done, but we just continued to believe in God. I began to bring the Chinese Bible to Simon in pieces. Simon had been a photography instructor and had many students who had graduated and started their own businesses. Simon's former students were everywhere, and they all welcomed us with warm and open arms everywhere we went. Simon would joke with them as he introduced me as his brother. After the formalities of meeting with the photography shop owners, we began to talk about other objectives. Eventually, we were able to find a place to make the film for the Bible printing. After some time, I received a phone call letting me know that the film was complete. The film was rolled up in a newspaper, and I picked it up. Once we had the film in our hands, we began to meet with each of the students again to see if we could get the Bible printed. When the students saw us coming, they were excited, I think for two reasons. One, they loved Simon. He really knew how to make a grand entrance and make his presence known. He didn't have much money, but not anyone really knew that. Simon was able to present himself in a way that impressed people and made them think that he had a lot of money, even though he didn't. He knew only 2 English words, and he used them all the time. He would make a big impression with the rural Chinese who thought that Simon must be a really cultured person because he was able to speak English. Little did they know that the only 2 phrases Simon ever knew was "no problem" and "sit down, please." He used these 2 phrases all the time and was really good at pronouncing them well. The other reason I think they were excited to see us is that they saw a foreigner, i.e., an opportunity to make money. One by one, we shared with them our desire to print the Bible. Each time we were told that they were not able to do it, and their heart would sink and their head would hang in disappointment. "Dear honorable teacher, you are always welcome in our place," they would say. "We would do anything to please you and assist you, but we are unable to help you on this project." I understood their challenge. If they agreed to help us, their livelihood would be in danger. At the time, a law had just come out that said that anyone caught printing a Bible would be arrested, their business confiscated, and they would be given a minimum of 7 years in prison. We visited 12 to 15 different photography shops, all of which were owned by Simon's former students. But every one of them was reluctant to help us. Even though I understood, I still found the fact that they wouldn't print the Bible a bit perplexing. I mean, we were traveling in the kinds of places that I had never been to before in the interior of China. These printers said that they were not able to print Bibles illegally because the risk was too high, but most of them printed many illegal things that I considered to be much more dangerous than printing the Bible. They were printing pornography and anti-government and anti-communist materials. Personally, I thought those materials were more damning for the government than a mere Bible. More time passed. And we visited all potential printing places that Simon could think of. We traveled to far places far from the city center, and we met with people who really knew the underground printing world well. We searched high and low and came up empty-handed. We felt that this vision was directly from the Lord, and we were really confused. If God wanted us to do that, then why were all of the doors closing on us? If God truly had given us the vision to print these Bibles in China, then why did every road lead to a dead end? One day, Simon had returned to the city. We were standing in the town square, and a sense of depression descended upon me. I looked at him and said, "Simon, we've done all that we can do. There's nothing more that can be done." "We haven't done all that we can do," he replied. "Of course we have. Is there one place we haven't tried? Do you know someone else that we haven't talked to? It seems everyone has turned us away because it's just too dangerous to print Bibles in China." "No, we haven't tried that place." I turned to look at the place that he was pointing to. I saw a massive building within walking distance with a big red banner draped across the front. As I began to look at it, it made sense. The bold Chinese characters on the banner said this. After reading, I said, "Simon, what you're proposing is suicide. We can't go in there." "No way." "Why not?" I replied. I looked at his face, expecting that there'd be a smirk or a laugh. Maybe he was trying to lighten the mood of all of our disappointment. But as I studied him, I realized that he was very serious. In his eyes, he wasn't joking. I looked back up at the banner. The sign indicated that this building was the official printing house of the Communist Chinese government. "How can we honestly tell the Lord that we've done all that we could if we haven't?" he said. "I cannot go to the Lord and tell him in good conscience that I've done everything in my power to, if I believe he has called us to do, if I haven't. There is a printing press right there in front of us. All we have to do is try." He was serious. He had to be stopped. "Simon," I said, "look at the building. It's the official printing press. Take a good look at those guards. If we go over there with our request, it's possible that they'll shoot us. This is not funny. We're talking about a serious situation here." Simon had made up his mind. He believes strongly that a believer who has been given a task from the Lord, such as this one, has to put on all of his armor and put all of his trust in the Lord, walking by faith, not by sight. I tried to reason with him, but he compelled me to trust the Lord. I was encouraged by his faith, but guarded by reason. As I looked down at Simon, I knew that this was something he felt strongly about, and he would go into that building with or without me. On the other hand, I felt that it was not only hopeless to try, but we were needlessly endangering ourselves and our work. It was at that time I wondered what kind of family I had been adopted into. I was reluctant to go, but as I looked back at Simon, he looked back at me with a smirk on his face, patted me on the back, and said his famous phrase, "No problem." I will continue this story in our next podcast. I want to thank you so much for joining us for this Back to Jerusalem podcast. Again, I'm Eugene Bach, your host for this time, and I pray that this story has been as much of a blessing to you as it has been to me. Do not forget to download our next podcast on this subject, part 3. You're going to love how this story ends. God bless.